I'm making a video game. It's about a bear who lives in a forest and is very hangry, and because of that, he's drop kicking people until they explode. Let's talk game design. So, we've got a lot to cover because there's a lot that I need to explain, because the game I'm making now, not to sound arrogant, self-centered and narcissistic, is incredibly original. I say that because the last commercial game I released, Reiterate, was a 2D platformer. It's very easy to explain a 2D platformer because there's a bajillion of them, and I could say something like, it's like Celeste, but exactly the same, and you'd know what I mean. Hangry Bear, on the other hand, is not like that. There isn't really a game I can point to and say, it's this but made by me. The closest I can get is, imagine Sega's Crazy Taxi, except in a big square arena type level, where although the primary objective is to get from point to point, like in Crazy Taxi, there's a lot of secondary objectives like leveling up to increase your speed, aiming for collectibles to get some of your ever decreasing timer back, and managing your turbo bar, because you have a turbo bar, by drop kicking people in the face. Not as simple, is it? So let's start with... If you watch other game designers on YouTube, you might be sick of hearing the phrase primary gameplay loop, but it sounds a lot more impressive than what you do most of the time. It's a good way of framing your game's design and keeping track of what you need to focus on and spend most of your time doing, organising your to-do list from most to least important. In Hangry Bear, you spend most of your time running around a level trying to collect fish. That is the primary gameplay loop, and it means the most important thing I've had to focus on is, well, that. Running around a level. If you look at the way that our bear moves, what you'll find interesting is that it isn't particularly snappy. You don't immediately turn 90 degrees when you move the analog stick left or right. Instead, you have a turning circle a little bit like a car in a racing game. And to reinforce this, you don't move forward by holding up on said analog stick, but instead by holding the right trigger, like you're accelerating a car. Now you might be thinking, hang on, why would you not make the player control as responsive and snappy as you possibly can? Isn't that the right way to do it? Short answer, no. Longer answer, no. And please stop thinking there's a right way to design video games. They are an art and not a science. Let's say that running around collecting fish was the only thing that you did in this game. Where would the challenge come from? How would you add depth to this if you weren't allowed to add in other mechanics and challenges, which we'll get to later? Obvious, isn't it? Part of the challenge should be in the act of moving around itself. I'm not saying that steering our bear around is complicated or particularly difficult, because it's not, but it's not as easy as it could be. It's a specific setup of physics and movement that makes the act of just running around something that you need to pay attention to, and that you can passively get better at just by experience. This shouldn't be the case in every game, and honestly it probably shouldn't be the case in most games, because the primary gameplay loop in those games isn't moving around. Something like the Yakuza series, for example, doesn't have the act of moving around as part of its main challenge and loop. Getting from one place to another in that game isn't something you need to consider too much, because what you're mostly concerned with doing is punching dudes in the face, or bowling, or playing arcade games, or baseball, or running a cabaret club, or one of the other 50,000 things that a member of the Yakuza obviously does. So you can turn basically immediately, move at a brisk pace, and generally not have to worry about it, which means that your movement physics can be snappy and responsive. Now compare that to something like Resident Evil 4, where your ability, or more importantly inability to move in a snappy and responsive way, is directly linked to what the game is challenging you to do. The over-the-shoulder tank controls make your movement choices thoughtful and methodical, because if you don't pay attention to where you are, where you're going, and what might be either to the side or behind you, you might get chainsawed to death by a man with a bag on his head as if you were going shopping in a local supermarket in the West Midlands. For those of you that have played Resident Evil 4, imagine how much easier it would be if Leon could strafe. If you could just circle around anything in front of you with a convenient lock-on targeting system and maybe dodge roll out of the way. It would take away from the focus of the game, which is to walk forward like a cool badass one-man army and try not to die while you're blowing the brains out of a very sick Spanish man's head. So that is why Hangry Bear controls the way that it does, and why we look at the movement physics and controls in such detail. In fact, I hope you're not sick of it yet, because we're still not done. There's also an experience and a level up system. The UI for that isn't finished yet though, so don't go commenting about how you can't tell what's going on, because we'll do that in a later video. I'm bringing it up now because this level up system gradually increases your maximum speed, but your turning speed doesn't go up with it. What this means is although you're going to get faster, the act of moving is going to become more challenging, because you'll have to learn how to control the bear even better as the max speed goes up. So although you're progressing and overall getting more equipped to do better, that organically brings with it a higher skill requirement for you to proceed. This is something I borrowed from another game series, Katamari Damacy. If you've never heard of Katamari, it's a game where you roll a ball around and pick stuff up. until the ball becomes even bigger and lets you pick up more stuff to become even bigger and pick up more stuff to become even bigger. You do all this because your dad, the king of all cosmos, wrecked the entire universe on a drunken bender one night, and then became a famous worldwide celebrity when you fixed it. They're fantastic games and you should play them. Anyway, in the Katamari games, as you progress organically through the level, growing bigger and bigger and being able to pick up more and more stuff, your Katamari becomes harder to control. Now you're already controlling it in a weirdly specific way, with the left and right analog sticks more or less representing your hands, and the side that you're applying force from, and the gradually increasing size and weight adds a level of unwieldy rising challenge as you move on. If you've been paying attention so far, you can see why this would work. The primary gameplay loop is just pushing a ball around, but the act of doing that is relatively deep and complicated, because it's what you're doing all the time, and this simple singular mechanic gets more challenging as you progress. That's the main element of Hangry Bear's primary loop, but it wouldn't be worthwhile if you didn't have anything to do with it. In Katamari, for example, you need to use those weird physics to pick up more stuff according to a time limit or a series of diverse challenges that your dad sets you. In Hangry Bear, you use your specifically designed movement to collect fish. Remember how I mentioned Crazy Taxi? In that, you follow an arrow to where you're trying to go and deal with the challenges that the game puts in your way, while a timer that you have some influence over ticks down in the background. Hangry Bear is exactly like that, combining Crazy Taxi's guidance and goals with Katamari's sense of specifically complicated control physics to mush together into the primary gameplay loop. The arrow is interesting because it aims entirely straight as the crow flies towards your objective. What this means is as much as it's telling you where to go, it's not telling you how to get there. That's up to you, and it's based on your reactions to obstacles in your way and your familiarity with the level. We'll cover this more in a level design devlog later on, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that. Now back to talking about the primary gameplay loop, because I haven't bored you all to death yet. The reason I know this is a good game mechanic is because it would, on its own, make for a relatively entertaining game. At least I think so, but I'm an old man and I like arcade games, so shut up while I yell at this cloud. But we're not done, because now we can talk about... If the whole point of the game is to move around quickly, then a good way of extending the depth of that is to add more ways to modify and improve your ability to move around quickly. So Hangry Bear has a turbo mode, where this bar on the left gives you a set amount of time where you can hold the turbo button and run at an even greater speed than normal. Now obviously this makes our bear run like an anime ninja, because what else would you do? Anyway, you can see how the title of this video is all about focus, right? This is where focus starts coming into play with our design. We've just spent an inordinately long amount of time banging on about the primary gameplay loop and where the basic challenge of what you do all the time comes from, and a big part of that is your ability to steer and control your bear depending on his speed. What I've done with the turbo function is to take that even further. You run much quicker than your regular maximum speed, but you also can't really steer very well. Your steering speed actually goes down while you're turbo running, so you'll need to assess the risk and trade-off between going very quickly and being able to steer around stuff that's in your way. If you've been paying attention, you'll understand why this works and how it feeds into the primary loop of the game itself. This is, finally, the point of the video. Teachable moment. If you filter everything you add through your primary gameplay loop, you'll keep your game's design focused. And focus is very important for achieving what you want your game to be. In the last video, we talked about how the point of Hangry Bear, its intent, is to be a pick up and play quick session arcade game primarily for the Steam Deck that you can play over and over for a bit until you're satisfied and go do something else. Focus is how we make sure our design is achieving that. Without focus and really being clear with yourself how you're going to accomplish your intent, you run the risk of running off the rails, spiraling out of control, and succumbing to, among other things, something that we call scope creep. Is one of the many dangers of the game design and development process. It's when the game you started making balloons outwards in terms of scale, mechanics and production value, needlessly taking up more and more of your time, effort, energy and money. I have no empirical data to back this up, but if I had to guess, I would say that it's the #1 cause for why development times for games run for years longer than you thought they would. Why some of them, if they do come out, feel like a huge sandbox of half-finished ideas that just don't mesh together very well. And why many bright-eyed, optimistic young indie developers lose the spark of passion that they had and become bitter, cynical old people working in a beige office call centre for a boss lady named Sharon. who wants you to do overtime so she can show you photos of her kids at their school Christmas play. If you keep in mind focus and intent, you can navigate around the problem of scope creep because you'll have a pretty good idea of what your game needs to be done. This isn't a one-size-fits-all vaccine to the problem, but it will mitigate some of the dangers if every time you go to add something you really stop and think, do I need this for this game to be what I want it to be? You do have to be honest and quite critical with yourself, but if you take a mental step back whenever you have a new idea and look at it from a point of view of, I don't know, some rando writing a review on your Steam page, it's a good philosophy to try and keep you on track. Keeping focus in mind is also good for something that I like to call... Some people will tell you that if you're going to sit down and design a game, you should do that. Sit down and design a game. Get a pen and a piece of paper and write out a plan and list of requirements and a schedule and all of that stuff. It's something you might have heard referred to before as a GDD or a game design document. This does work for a lot of people, and if you're one of those, I'm not criticising you. You do you. If it works, carry on. But there is actually another method of designing a video game that's a little bit less well known, and it's particularly worthwhile for solo indie game devs like me. It's something I call DBP, or Design by Play, and the way it works is like this. You've started making a game because you had an idea. There's something you wanted to do, and you thought, yeah, okay, I'll sit down and make that thing, see what that's like. As a practical example, look at the bear running around grabbing fish. That was the initial idea, the sort of crazy taxi-esque destination and movement idea that formed the bare foundation of the primary gameplay loop. Bare foundation. So I made that, and I liked it, and it worked out the way that I wanted it to. I played around with the physics, the settings, the camera, the controls, all of that, and I tweaked it until it felt exactly the way that I'd pictured it in my head. Great. Awesome. Done. Now, if I was going the GDD route, I'd look down at a piece of paper that said something like make bear run, and I'd tick that off the list, and then I'd look at what else was on the list and work my way through that. And in doing that, I'd have a solid list of features that I'd implement until the list is all ticked off and I can say, right, great, good, game's done, let's get it out there. That is, like I said, an absolutely valid way to design a game, and if that's what you do, I'm not here to criticise. If you are a game developer, you and I both know the fact that your games make it out the door at all is nothing short of a miracle. Having said that, this approach does have its drawbacks. The main one is that there is absolutely no substitute in the world for playing a video game. I can sit here and show you video footage all day long. You can go and read reviews on gaming websites whenever something comes out. You can watch the trailers, see what people are saying on social media, all of that stuff, but none of it is a substitute for the feeling of actually playing the game yourself. It's why a playable demo can be so rewarding and useful when a game is coming soon, because there's nothing that can replace your audience getting their hands on your idea directly. What this also does is it gives you opinions and feedback automatically. You will know what works and what doesn't because you're playing it there and then. If you're designing and developing according to a GDD, you don't really get this until your to-do list is done. You won't know how well or good or effectively something is working until you've put everything in and got it all up and running according to the plan. And it's a very, very rigid way of looking at things. It's great if you're planning construction. You're about to build a skyscraper, so you do need an all-encompassing, comprehensive plan of everything that the skyscraper is going to need, with exact measurements, structural plans, material choices, all of that. Because what you're about to do needs to be right and solid and correct at the very first attempt, or else a lot of people are going to be very mad at you if they're not already covered in concrete. Game design though, not so much. And the way Design by Play works is that you take your basic idea that you had in the first place and you play with it. And as you play with it, you ask yourself a series of questions. Things like, what else does this need? What could be fun? What would be interesting? What do I want to have happen now? What can I do here? How much effort would that take? And from this, your initial idea gets fleshed outwards with things that you know from playing it will make it better. Now, I know I just said better, and that's a very dangerous word because I imagine a lot of you are now sat there going, Zane, didn't you just warn us about scope creep? Isn't this literally how that happens, going through a series of extra mechanics and content that the initial game doesn't need? And yes, but also no. Because what I also told you is that keeping in mind the focus of your game will mitigate that from happening. As you're designing like this, thinking of new fun things to go along with the idea you're playing through, you filter every answer you get through your focus on the primary gameplay loop and what you intend the game to be, your intent. I'll give you an example. One of the first things I added was a jump. Now, the jump gets you over a very specific height of obstacle. It's one button You can do it at any time, and it's very, very leniently designed so that you can jump way earlier or later than the obstacle's actual position before it negatively impacts you. And since we're talking about jumping, I swear to God, if any of you mention coyote time, I will track you down and beat. The reason this works is it modifies what you're doing in your primary gameplay loop, the focus of what it is I want you to do in the game. It's an obstacle that plays into your movement and will affect the skill ceiling of you achieving your goal. It is intrinsically linked to the thing I want you to do. The turbo is exactly the same, and so is this. This is a flip. As you can see, it'll turn you 180 degrees on the spot. It's set to its own button. You can do it whenever you like, as long as your animation has stopped playing, and it will maintain your current speed at the same time. And then the camera will swing around as quickly as it can without giving you motion sickness. Hopefully. I put this in because as I was playing around, I realised that raising the difficulty of steering and controlling your bear is fine, but it was fairer on the player if I gave you at least an extra tool of control in order to master and adapt to that challenge. I also put it in because Katamari has it, and you should steal well and steal often. There's also a roll, which has to be used in order to smash open time crates and add a few seconds back to your timer. This came from thinking that there should be some way for you to extend your available time, but it'd require some kind of skillful input. In Crazy Taxi, you get variable time returned to you based on how quickly you completed your last job. Crazy Taxi modulates this and creates an extra layer of depth to your performance by having different levels of difficulty and length for the jobs that you take on, indicated by the colour around your passengers before you pick them up. Now what this means is there's a degree of on-the-fly decision making that you do, related to how much or little time you want or need back, and whether you're willing to take on a longer job for more cash but that will take up more time, that sort of thing. These are all decisions that in Crazy Taxi lead towards the focus of the game and what the intent is. As a result, the time crate system in Hungry Bear comes from the same philosophy. You could, if you want, always head straight to the next fish and hope that you get enough crates along the way to keep your remaining time up, or you could, if you want, go out of your way to get a few more crates and build up some more time. The roll doesn't affect your current speed, but it is something you have to actively do, which adds another small requirement to your traversal of the level. I think by now I probably don't need to explain to you how this fits the focus of the game's design, do I? If I do, you should probably rewind and pay more attention. Then there's the big one, the most marketable feature of the game so far and quite possibly the dumbest, the dropkick. But first a word from our sponsor. Hello, I'm our sponsor. This video is about Hungry Bear, and the video is also sponsored by Hungry Bear. This is your periodical reminder to go and wishlist Hungry Bear on Steam, where it is available for wishlisting, and you should do that if you haven't already wishlisted it on Steam, which you should go and do now. Thanks. Now back to the video. Thank you, our sponsor. So the dropkick is a very big risk-reward move. It's the only way to deal with the NPC people dancing around in your level, but if you do hit it on them, your turbo bar refills in its entirety. You get a massive score boost and a whopping 10 seconds gets added to your timer. The way this is balanced is that there's only ever one of these dudes active at a time, so you can't reasonably go around farming them, because they don't spawn often or predictably. What this means is if you see one, it probably is worth going out of your way to get it, but to do that you're going to need to really understand the physics of the dropkick, because it drops your speed all the way down and takes comparatively quite a long time for the animation to play out before you can go back to running again, so if you get it wrong, you are really going to suffer. Again, at this point I probably don't need to explain to you how focus affects whether this mechanic should exist and be implemented or not. What I probably do need to do now is step back a bit and give you a full overview of how all of these mechanics fit together. I also want to remind you that they were all designed by playing, or DBP. They're all ideas I had, implemented, tweaked, tested and adjusted and reworked by just playing around with the core game and asking myself what might improve or diversify that experience. You've got a roll for time crates, a turbo run for a much higher max speed at the cost of steering, a jump for some ankle level obstacles, a flip for making hard 180-degree turns while maintaining your speed, and a drop kick specifically for taking out high value NPCs. Let's now go back to the intent of the game to make a relatively simple pick up and play arcade-like experience that you can play for a bit, have a good time with, then go do something else. And then if we look at the primary gameplay loop of running around collecting fish, that's what we're focusing on. That's our focus. Look at how long I spent and the thought and focus on the physics and specific stats of the player's basic movement. And then look at the list of mechanics I've just explained and you can see how they're all intrinsically linked and intertwined with that. They're not separate things that you just go off and do, like a gardening section in the corner where you water some plants, or a bit where you just start spontaneously building a tower in the middle of the map while dancing like Peter Griffin and Ariana Grande cries over your shoulder. They were all also designed by playing that initial idea and asking myself questions about what would improve, enhance, diversify or alter the basic gameplay, and then feeding those answers through the focus of what I want the game to do, be be, and achieve. I've managed to mitigate scope creep by making sure anything I want to add in is actively related to that primary loop. And you've hopefully now come to realise how important focus is. In the next episode we will talk about what all of this is actually for, because obviously you've now got a gameplay loop and a series of mechanics and features that are focused on that. But other than getting a nebulous score at the end on a screen that I haven't finished designing yet, what does that actually do? And what's with all the pigeons that keep exploding? And why didn't you actually explain the levelling up system properly, you lazy old hack? If you want to find out, you'll have to come back next time. Until then, please don't forget to wishlist Hangry Bear on Steam, like this video if you liked the video you just liked, and subscribe for more videos like the video you just liked since you liked it, and I will see you the next time I'm thinking, hey, let's talk game design.